Hi, everybody. Welcome to Teams webinar, which we are still learning. So thanks for patience. We'll give it a couple more minutes to see if more folks filter in. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. Sorry, I'm being repetitive. We're just giving it maybe one more minute to see if more folks filter in, and then we'll get started. Thanks for your patience. First 2 minutes are always the worst part of every webinar. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kellen Warner. I am a project manager for the South Coast region at the State Coastal Conservancy, and I'm the Community Wetlands Grant Program Manager. So I'll go ahead and let my colleague, Thomas Morales, introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Thomas Morales. I'm a 2025 Sea Grant Fellow working in the South Coast at the State Coastal Conservancy. And in today's webinar, we will provide an overview of the Southern California Wetland Restoration Project's Community Wetland Restoration Grant Program. And that's quite the mouthful, so you'll often hear us referring to it simply as CWRGP. And today we'll be discussing the background of the CWRGP, the 2025 grant round details, and we'll also go over the application guidelines, the template, selection criteria, as well as what you can expect if you're selected as a 2025 grantee. And we will address questions regarding the application and anything else we've discussed during the webinar at the end in a Q&A format, but please feel free to input questions in the chat box as they come up throughout the webinar, and we'll answer them at the end. And this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Coastal Conservancy YouTube page and linked on the WRP website. And we're still new to webinars on Teams, so thank you in advance as we figure it out. Next slide. So to give a little more background about the CWRGP, this slide shows the geographic extent of the Wetland Recovery Project region, which stretches along the coast from the U.S.-Mexico border in San Diego up to the Point Conception in the Santa Barbara subregion. And each coastal wetland is indicated by a red dot, and non-tidal wetlands are shown as individual blue dots. And the CWRGP projects have been funded throughout this region, including out on the Channel Islands. And next slide. And the Southern California Wetland Recovery Project, or WRP for short, which runs the Community Wetlands Restoration Grant Program, is a partnership of 18 state and federal agencies chaired by the California Natural Resources Agency and is supported by the California State Coastal Conservancy. And through the WRP partnership, public agencies, scientists, and local communities work cooperatively to support and facilitate acquisition, enhancement, and restoration of wetlands in coastal Southern California. And now moving on to the WRP regional strategy. The WRP is guided by our regional strategy, which was updated in 2018. As you just saw on the previous slide, there's 18 agencies that are members of the Wetland Recovery Project, which takes a lot of coordination. So having a strategy that outlines our goals is important. And you can see our 4 main goals here on the right. Importantly, the regional strategy lays out quantitative objectives and management strategies for meeting each of these goals. And the 2018 WRP Regional Strategy is a document that articulates long-term goals and specific implementation strategies to help guide wetland restoration for the WRP over the next few decades in order to improve wetland resilience to climate change and other stressors. And the regional strategy does include quantitative objectives to help the WRP track success over time. The regional strategy guides agencies in setting goals, as well as quantitative objectives and management strategies for each of these goals. These goals include Goal 1, to preserve and restore resilient coastal tidal wetlands and associated marine and terrestrial habitats. Goal 2, preserve and restore stream adjacent habitats and other non-tidal wetland ecosystems to support healthy watersheds. Goal 3, support education and compatible access related to coastal wetlands and watersheds. And Goal 4, advance the science of wetland restoration and management in Southern California. And the CWRGP supports achieving all of these goals as it is a restoration program. But in particular, it really targets Goal 3 by supporting community-based restoration projects. And historically, this program has been funded by various agencies and organizations. And this year, the CWRGP will be administered and funded by the State Coastal Conservancy, and our anticipated source of funding is the California Climate Bond. And since 2001, the CWRGP has provided over $4 million in funding to over 175 community-based restoration projects in coastal wetlands along coastal stream corridors in the Southern California region. And a few years ago, the program underwent a programmatic evaluation process. This included a gap assessment to determine who funding had gone to in the past and where those projects were located. And on the flip side, who hadn't received funding and what areas have seen a lack of CWRGP projects. We also solicited feedback from former grantees and worked with program partners to re-envision the program with the overall goals of reaching a broader audience, funding wetland restoration projects that are rooted in and benefit systematically excluded communities, and improve support for capacity building. Moving on to program priorities. The revisioning process led to there being a total of 4 CWRG priorities. The first is to engage CWRG priority communities to restore or enhance coastal wetlands and coastal stream corridors. These priority communities include, but are not limited to, lower income individuals and households, people with disabilities, Black, Indigenous, people of color, immigrant communities, and other historically marginalized communities. And there are a number of tools that have been developed to identify these priority communities, such as CalEnviro California State Parks Community Fact Finder, and the California Department of Water Resources. And these are all mapping tools, and we'll include these links in the chat. And our second priority is to implement restoration projects that have strong community benefits, such as community engagement, education, workforce development, career development, and leadership development. And our third priority is to demonstrate community-led planning and implementation of habitat restoration projects that are anchored in community expertise. An example of this can include community leaders, community-based organizations, tribal members, local planners, or local and state government officials. And our fourth priority is to increase organizational capacity to plan and implement habitat restoration projects. And now let's focus on the 2025 grant cycle. So eligible applicants for the CWRGP program include 501c3 nonprofit organizations, local government agencies, tribes, and universities. And our eligible projects include projects that will restore or preserve coastal wetlands, coastal stream corridors, or other non-tidal wetlands, and projects that will involve community and restoration implementation, and projects that also have an educational component. And moving to the grant award, there will be approximately $300,000 to be available for the 2025 grant round, and applicants may request a grant up to $100,000. And the average grant amount will range between $30,000 to $100,000. And we anticipate the selection of 3 to 5 projects. And for project duration, the maximum will be 2.5 years, with projects starting in spring and summer of 2025, and projects completed by 2028.
All right, that should say 2026.
Right.
Ignore
Correct.
this slide, it's kind of a lie. Okay, I'm jumping over anyway, so that works out. And also just to note, these are anticipated. It's kind of a tentative schedule. We're still waiting on getting the Conservancy's appropriation of the climate bond funding, which will be funding this project. So we're hoping all this will work out in this timeline, but just so you know, it is a little tentative. But we're keeping to the strict deadline for when applications are due, and hopefully by October we have a better read on when we're going to have access to the funding to be able to give it out. So these are some projects that we funded in previous grant rounds. Activities among these 3 highlighted projects are things like the installation of native plants, the removal of non-native vegetation, seeding and propagation, trash abatement, establishment of educational kiosks, and we're working on projects where there's creation of curriculum that's then shared out. Other things you can do with this funding are things like students, families, and community members participating in habitat restoration events and educational field trips. Field trips like wetland conservation field trips, talking about the indigenous significance of the land, wildlife, vegetation, water quality and monitoring. You can also use the funding for things like professional development workshops for teachers to learn about wetland ecology, stormwater runoff, and watersheds. There on the application guidelines, there are examples of project types and activities that have been funded and we think could be funded, but it's not fully inclusive. So if you're wondering if your project type is eligible, please schedule a consultation with us. We'd love to talk to you about it more. I also would like to apologize if you can hear my dog panting in the background. She just came in from a run, and she stopped the minute I said that. Okay, some other considerations to think about. We will be able to, sorry, this sentence has changed. We can't award more than 1 CWRGP grant per applicant. So if you are thinking about multiple projects that maybe fit this funding source, I would pick the one that you think is the best, because we're only going to be able to consider one at a time. Projects proposed for transitional upland habitat must demonstrate a clear connection and benefit to the adjacent wetland habitat. And then if the applicant is not the landowner of the project site, you'll need to provide evidence of landowner approval prior to project implementation. This can sometimes delay the timeline for some folks. So if you're applying for this, maybe start thinking about that now. You can ask us for some examples of what that landowner agreement looks like. We're happy to provide a template for you. And then this last bullet point is also a little bit TBD based on our funding source. So previous funding sources, we've had to include a 10 to 15 year grant agreement to ensure long-term project protection of the project site. For example, if you install native plants that there's not a parking lot in that space instead in 10 years. And obviously we think that that's important, but it is a little hard for some of these smaller restoration projects to have that kind of limitation, especially if you're not the landowner. So as we have working with our legal team now, and as we get more information about our climate bond funding, we'll know if this is actually going to be a for sure requirement of grantees. So to be determined, but we'll be in clear communication with applicants and with those who are awarded the funding. So things that we cannot fund are solely experimental or research projects, anything that's only construction, anything that's solely recreational, or ongoing monitoring and maintenance projects, unless it's tied to a specific restoration project where monitoring is necessary to ensure project success and it's completed within the duration of the project. All right, selection criteria. All of this is included in the application guidelines as well, so you don't have to memorize it. I'm just going to read through them all though. Okay, so the extent to which the project will restore coastal wetlands, streams, adjacent habitats, and other non-tidal wetlands. The extent to which the project meaningfully engages priority communities to restore or enhance coastal wetlands and coastal stream corridors. The degree to which the project implements restoration projects that have a strong community benefit, such as community engagement, education, workforce development, career development, and leadership development. These are off. These are different. Sorry about that. The extent to which the project demonstrates community-led planning and implementation of desired projects that are anchored in community expertise. They are right. I was just off. Okay, number 5. I'll say the number one, so it also helps me. The extent to which the project will advance meaningful hands-on community involvement in wetland restoration projects, particularly involvement beyond the traditionally engaged environmental groups. The degree to which the project will help build the applicant's capacity to plan and implement wetland restoration projects and/or increase community engagement in wetland restoration projects. Applicant experience and capacity to implement the project and provide required long-term project protection agreements. Ooh, that's quite a list. Hopefully some of that goes along with some of the work you're doing or the project that you're thinking about. And then, so the grant process, if you are interested in applying for this grant cycle, these are some important dates to remember. Good, these are all 2026 and 2025 appropriately, as opposed to the last one that we showed. Please note that, again, that this is the proposed schedule and none of the dates besides the due date are set in stone. So the applications are due on October 1st by 5 p.m. Emailed to me. I will share my email again at the end. It's on the website. It's on all the application materials, so hopefully you can't miss it. And after we get all our applications in, we're going to have an application review by a selection committee. The selection committee is made up of folks from the Coastal Conservancy as well as other members of the Wetlands Recovery Project managers group. So last year we had someone from the Coastal Commission, we had someone from CDFW, we had someone from Wetland Conservation Board. So it's a mix of different folks who know a lot about wetlands and who are part of the WRP. The provisional notifications of award or denial will be sent out also in October, so we're hoping to get through our review quickly. And then the selected project proposals are due to be presented to our Coastal Conservancy Board for funding approval in February of 2026. Following board approval, if we get approved, the Conservancy will enter into grant agreements and develop work programs with successful applicants in the spring, summer of 2026. And then it's anticipated that funding will become available to grantees in May of 2026, at which point the project can begin. Again, still a little tentative. Unfortunately, we don't have that funding source wrapped up, but we will keep applicants and selected projects in the know about when things will be available. But we are hoping that it becomes available pretty soon after that board meeting in February, so people can get off and running with all their summer programming and summer planting and things that people do. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into the grant application guidelines and template. The guidelines are meant to provide more detailed information and complement the template. So I encourage applicants to read through the guidelines before they even begin to fill out the template, just because it's a useful document and we update it yearly. Both the guidelines and the template the template documents can be downloaded from our website, which Thomas is going to throw in the chat, so you can look at that. And the website looks just like this. The arrows are pointing to the links for downloading both the application guidelines and the template. Again, it has my email address, which is everywhere. If you ever need anything, you can reach out. So to complete the proposal and what's in the template, it's going to include 4 sections. The application cover page, which is actually 2 pages, page is a lie. Second is the project narrative, which is a maximum of 7 pages. If you can try to keep to that word limit, that would be awesome, because we've had to review a decent amount of these in the past. So it's good to be to the point as much as you can be. The third is the project budget, and then the fourth is any additional attachments. And let's spend a little bit of time going over each of these sections in more detail. Okay, cover pages. This is just the basic information about the project and you and your organization, including contact info, a summary, very short summary of the project, and information about the location of the project. The project narrative, which again is 7 pages max, has 13 sections that you'll need to complete. The application template has instructions on how to answer each question, but I'll just run through them all with some additional context. So the first is the need for the project, just 1 to 2 paragraphs. Second is site description. This is just a short 1 paragraph describing site characteristics and includes who owns and manages the site location. The third is the CWRGP priorities. This section just lists out the 4 priorities, which we discussed earlier, and asks that you check off which ones your project will address. Not just how many, but also how well a project meets each of these priorities is considered by the selection committee. So I strongly encourage you to consider these priorities as you're designing your projects. Okay. 4, project description. So this is where you'll want to describe how the project will meet each of the priorities you selected. Describe the goals, objectives, and expected benefits of the project. Describe how restoration efforts will increase wetland acreage or enhance existing wetland or wetland-associated habitat. Provide a description of the restoration methods, including use of best available science or practices if available. For example, science used in design, implementation, or evaluation. And this section is 1 to 2 pages. It's kind of the meat of your application. And so for this section, please don't just answer bullet point by bullet point, but kind of build a narrative, tell us the story of your project. The 5th section is on the CWRGP priority community engagement. This one is broken down into 3 subsections. The first asks you to describe any priority communities the project will engage. You can use the mapping tools we put in the chat earlier. We also want you to describe the relationship the project team has with the priority communities or community. We're looking for really meaningful engagement here. So we want to know if the project is led or co-led by an organization that is led and primarily serves members of the CWRGP community. If not, how is your project planning to engage communities in meaningful ways? Examples I've seen of this in past projects is ensuring partners have decision-making power in the project or providing workforce training or paid internships. We've also seen larger orgs that have a higher capacity apply for the grant, but include smaller organizations as sub-grantees that actually receive the bulk of the funding. And lastly, we're asking you to describe any challenges or difficulties the community faces in accessing the area to be restored or enhanced. So again, for this section, what we're not looking for is for you to just check a box. We're really looking for applicants that are either organizations led by and serving priority communities or partner and engage with priority communities in ways that are meaningful to the specific project. And I know some of this probably will also show up in your project description, which is totally fine. This is just the section where we really want you to highlight what you're doing to support community engagement. Okay, 6 is project readiness. So how close is your project ready to being, how close are you ready for implementation? And then demonstrate how that will be ready to start in the project timeline. which goes along well with 7, which is permits. So we'll have a table where you'll list permits for your project requirements, if any, and what their respective status is. And then similarly for 8, we want to know if your project is under California Environmental Quality Act or CEQA. And this is one of the things where if you have a question for your specific project about this, please don't hesitate to reach out to us by email, and we can talk about it over email or have a phone call or a Zoom consultation. Ooh, okay, last one. The 9th is specific tasks. This is a table for you to fill out, like what tasks will take place under the work of this project, along with a brief description of each of them. And then the 10th is how success will be measured. So for this, we want to know both how you'll measure the success of restoration as well as the success of outreach, and include what metrics or tools you plan to use to measure that success. Ecologically, examples could be species survival counts of plantings. For outreach, this could be volunteer counts, or I've seen surveys done with teachers of classrooms that projects partner with. The 11th, we want you to list out your partners and collaborators. Again, this will have likely shown up in previous sections in the project description, but this is where you can easily see everyone you are partnering and collaborating with. 12th is tribal engagement. We encourage that projects communicate, consult, or engage with tribes traditionally and culturally affiliated to the project area throughout the development and implementation of the project, particularly if the project applicant is not a tribe. The Coastal Conservancy will also be initiating consultation requests with tribal governments for any selected projects prior to recommending them the project for funding to our board. So it's just part of our normal process. Please don't say you're partnering with a tribe or tribal organization if they have not already agreed to work with you on this project. If for whatever reason you're waiting to secure funding to reach out, you need to make that clear in your application so we understand what level your partnership is at when we're having conversations with tribes. Again, though, we strongly encourage that applicants communicate with tribes as early as possible. All right, lucky number 13. Lastly, it's applicant experience and capacity, both with managing grants and also with running similar projects. Okay, project budget is the next section of the application. The budget can support a wide range of activities. We do suggest modifying the task titles to fit the project as appropriate, as well as adding or removing rows as necessary. Please note that organizational capacity, workforce development, and project planning and development activities must be related to wetland restoration project activities, and that altogether they must not total more than 50% of the total funding amount requested from this grant. And just a reminder that all of this is listed in the guidelines. So if you remember one thing from this webinar, please have it be to use the guidelines to your advantage. And attachments is the last thing you'll give us as a part of your application. This one will need a regional and site scale map that shows the location of project elements, and 1 to 3 project photos that provide more detail as to what the project site looks like. In addition, nonprofit applicants should include the following with their application: a letter of determination from the IRS indicating current 501c3 status, as well as a completed nonprofit organization pre-award questionnaire, which is linked in the application. And I will double check that it actually is linked, but I'm pretty sure it is. And I do want to note that applicants who have submitted the nonprofit questionnaire in the past 2 years don't need to resubmit it. And just a reminder, please don't include any additional attachments. We'll ask you for things like project support letters for projects that are selected to be taken to the Conservancy Board. So that's not a part of this round of things. I could have put more on the slide, but it's short and sweet. So the application procedure is to submit it electronically if you can, email to me at kellen.warner@scc.ca.gov by 5 p.m. on October 1st. All files should be uploaded as a single file in Word or as a PDF. Please name the file by your project name and try to make sure it's not too large so I can actually open it. And I know it's hard when you send something out into the world to not know if it's been received or what's happening with it. So for all of the ones that I receive, you should receive a email back from me saying that we got your application within 3 business days. If you don't get that back, please reach out because something happened. And then if electronic submission is not possible, hard copy applications must be postmarked by October 1st and sent to me at the address indicated on the application package. And if possible, please also notify me via email to expect your hard copy. I'm going to go through this very quickly because this has already been a big information dump. But if you are selected as a grantee, these are some of the requirements of projects to be able to start. So before you can begin work, we're going to need the grant agreement. We'll need a resolution from your board that acknowledges that they know that this project is happening and they support it. We'll also need insurance documentation and insurance policy certificate that shows that required types and levels of insurance. List the state of California as additional insured and reference your grant agreement number. Your insurance agent should be able to provide the certificate for you. And you're going to need a work program which details specific tasks, deliverables, project schedule, and task level budget for your project. And the work program can be amended over time, just so you know, but we need to, that's where we really get into what the work is doing and what the money is going towards specifically. And we've started a thing at the Conservancy where when you get a new grant in the couple of weeks following the board approval, the board meeting, we have a webinar for all the newly approved grants so they know what they need to do to get started. So grantees will be well supported to move forward to get their funding. And oh man, we'll even go down to reimbursements. For invoicing the Conservancy, you can include a completed request for disbursement form and a progress report describing work done during the billing period. Further instructions for all of these requirements, as well as templates, and for things like the board resolution and the work program. We have a whole grantee manual for that, which is on our website. And you'll also have an assigned project manager who will assist you with meeting all of these requirements. Okay, so please, that's all for the presentation. Please don't hesitate to reach out truly if you have any questions as you start your applications or as you're brainstorming projects or thinking about, you know, the project that you have coming up fits this funding source. And just a reminder, if you're unsure, you can send me a 1 to 2 paragraph description of your project. I'm happy to just give it a once over and let you know if it is eligible. We can also have a consultation, like an hour-long chat about what you're thinking about doing, and I can give you some advice on filling out the application. We are happy to be there for you because we really want this funding to go out to the amazing work that's going on in wetlands and wetland adjacent habitats in Southern California. So we have quite a bit of time for questions. So please use the Q&A feature to submit them. And I hope this was helpful. Thanks. Thomas, have there been any? I don't see anything in
No.
the chat. Cool. We'll give it a couple minutes. If there are no questions, it means we answered everything perfectly in our presentation. Okay, I've got a question. We have SEC funding for education programs. Can we leverage that for this grant? I think that's a great thing to mention in your grantee capacity section of the application to say, you know, we have a grant from the Conservancy. We've had previous grants with the Conservancy. They're going well. You know, I think that's a great thing to do. And if it's if it's a project that the Conservancy has funded, someone will know that you are one of our grantees and we'll be able to be like, oh, this person is doing good work and is a good responsive applicant. It's a good question. You're welcome. Yeah. And let me remind all of us which question that is. It's not project readiness. Applicant experience and capacity. So I would throw that on question 13. It seems like it's fine to fund salary from most of this funding, and that would be part of institutional capacity. Yeah, you can definitely fund salary with it. I do think, and that can be a good portion of it. And if, any of that funding of staff, if those are like early career folks, or if they're learning new skills that go along with this project, that are going to help them in their workforce development, or your organizational capacity, that helps. But you also definitely want to highlight any of the project funding that will be going towards the restoration directly. So, make sure you're including some of those costs, like we're going out and doing this many days of restoration and this much work with the community and things like that. But it absolutely can go towards salaries. Does wetland and underwater pollution removal qualify as a restoration activity? Oh, that is such a good question. Underwater pollution removal. We definitely have current grantees that have river cleanups as a component of their grant. So that is definitely something that is fundable with this grant. I think there just needs to be a strong tie of why removing those pollutants is restoration, but I think that is something that would work. But it also helps if you maybe you're removing something, but maybe putting, if you're installing something as well, that could be helpful if there's both of those components to it. But underwater's cool. I know we had a grantee that as some of their community outreach, they have days where they go out into a lagoon and they do removal of trash via kayak. So that's a good way to get the community out doing restoration. And then if you maybe include some monitoring as a part of that, that would be good. Oh, that's you. Awesome. Okay. Does the project need to only focus on priority communities, 100% of audience, or can it also include other communities and populations as long as the majority of the audiences are priority communities? Yes, great question. It's the latter. It does not have to be 100% of the audience is priority community, but I do think it will behoove you if the majority of your community outreach is towards priority communities. But definitely don't want to exclude anybody if you already have a group of volunteers that come out regularly and you want to continue to support that part of your project, then you can absolutely use some of this funding for that. This is a good question from Jacob. Can you further define wetland adjacent and upland acreage requirements? That we are definitely funding things that are just within the watershed. So anything if you are upland and it impacts a wetland. It's a little loose with wetland adjacent habitats. Feel free to reach out for a consultation. We can talk about the particulars of your project, but we've had projects where they focus on dune restoration, that's directly adjacent to a lagoon and a wetland, and then thinking about that transitional habitat piece is important. We need to make sure that all these different waterways that are going into wetlands are healthy and restored. So if you have a good way of connecting it to a wetland and saying like, hey, this impacts this area further downstream, that can be good. But happy to clarify that for your specific project in an email or a phone call. Can we apply for funding of an existing project, or does the project need to be new? That is another very good question. It can be an existing project. I think it's helpful if maybe the funding is going towards maybe a new component. Maybe there is a community that you haven't had the funding or capacity to work with before, that this funding source would be helpful for you being able to have that kind of outreach, but it doesn't need to be brand new. I know it's hard I come from the nonprofit space. I know it's hard with funding to feel like you have to keep thinking of new things all the time, and you're like, we have something good that we just need to be able to keep funding. So if the work you're doing fits this funding source and it's something you've been doing, you should apply or reach out and talk to me about if the particulars work. These are great questions. Thank you so much. You're welcome. Okay, I'll give it another couple minutes if anyone is noodling on anything. Oop. So the most important takeaways from this are, I'm sorry, I've said it about 50 billion times, it feels like, but Thomas and I are excited about giving out this funding, and the Conservancy in general is. So we absolutely want to hear from you if you are thinking about applying so we can make sure your project's eligible. I know these grants applications take a long time. So if we can help you know from the get if it is something that's even eligible and save your time, we definitely want to do that. So either email and set up a call, or we can do everything over email, whatever works best for you. Are planning or design projects eligible under this program? Oh, that is such a good question. Design and planning can be a component of the project, but we really do prioritize anything that has a implementation component. So for example, there's a project that we're funding now that has a few different parts, but one of the parts is selecting and designing restoration at a site in 1 year, and then the next year is going to be doing the pilot project of the restoration on that site. So definitely the planning can be a component of it, but we would like to see the actual implementation as a part of this as well, especially with the community outreach piece. I know the timeline's a little tough. I know 2.5 years is the guideline, kind of the hope. Depending on the funding source, we might have 3 years to stretch it out. So if that makes it easier for folks to be able to do the, really meaningful community engagement and design a project with a priority community, and then be able to start some of the implementation. That's a very good question. Hope I answered it. You're welcome. Okay, are installing erosion control structures eligible to prevent excess sediment from entering watershed? Ooh, interesting. I think I would need to know information, know more information, to give that a yes or no. I mean, that's important. I would love to know more about it. My gut doesn't say no, but I would need to check in. Part of it too is just with, because it's bond funding, we just need to make sure that everything is okay through the very specific guidelines that we're given with the climate bond, which is previously known as the Proposition 4. They've changed it to the climate bond. And so we just need to make sure that it would all be eligible under that bond funding. But give me more information. I think that sounds like it could be really interesting and important. I talk about sediment so much more than I ever thought I would. You're welcome. Oh, Thomas mentioned that at the beginning that we're recording this. We'll post it on the website, and then we'll also just send an email out with the recording too, in case that's helpful for folks to have it, to know where to find it, because I know our website can be a little bit of a maze. Ooh, I love this question. Thank you for this question, David. Can some of the funding be designated for travel expenses to support Title I schools to engage with the program and events? Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, things like bus transportation, making sure that folks can actually get to the events if they don't live in the community where the wetland is very important. So yes, bus expenses are something that we can fund with this. You're welcome. I like that you're thinking about that. Okay. I think I did the appropriate educator pause. Thank you all again so much for joining us. We are looking forward to learning about all the awesome work that you are doing. And I hope you have a great day.